Mexico just did something few expected. By mid-2025, it had become the United States' largest trade partner in goods, overtaking both China and Canada. According to U.S. Census data, Mexico handled about 16% of total U.S. goods trade during the first half of the year. This surge is credited to nearshoring and global geopolitical shifts, but the bigger question is whether Mexico can sustain it. Rapid growth faces pressure from structural constraints like inequality, crime, and an overstretched energy system. To see how this unexpected rise began, we'll start with the trade data that explains it. Mexico becomes America's top supplier again. Why is Mexico, long viewed as the smaller partner in North America's economy, now the leading supplier of goods to the U.S.? By early to mid-2025, Mexico had become the top source of American imports, a position long dominated by China. This followed a shift already visible in 2024, when Mexico first overtook China in several key import categories. The latest data makes the trend undeniable. Official U.S. Census reporting shows Mexico's share of U.S. goods trade reached about 16.4% by June 2025, clearly ahead of China and Canada. This development is more than a passing fluctuation. It represents structural changes in how multinational companies weigh cost, security, and risk when organizing supply chains. The numbers tell the story. In 2025, Mexico shipped goods worth hundreds of billions of dollars into the U.S. market and maintained a meaningful margin over China for the second consecutive year. The fact that the gap continued to widen is significant. For years, China's dominance looked unshakable, but the repercussions of trade wars, persistent tariff barriers, national security disputes, and the COVID-19 supply chain shock steadily chipped away at U.S. corporate confidence. Companies began revisiting a simple question: why depend on fragile, weeks-long shipping routes across the Pacific when there is a manufacturing base located just across the border? The industries underpinning Mexico's rise give a clear picture of why this shift has taken hold. Automotive still anchors the trade relationship. Mexico's factories supply engines, transmissions, and finished vehicles, while in recent years activity around electric vehicle components and battery parts has expanded rapidly. Electronics are another area of growth. Assembly of consumer devices and industrial systems has scaled up, especially as major firms prioritize being closer to American demand centers. Meanwhile, medical devices stand out as an unexpected winner. Production of surgical instruments, diagnostic tools, and hospital equipment has climbed sharply, especially in industrial areas once better known for textiles and simple assembly work. This diversification of exports reduces vulnerability to swings in any single sector, giving Mexico a more balanced trade profile than before. Three forces explain why these industries chose Mexico instead of other locations. First, geography. Shipments from northern Mexico to U.S. industrial hubs can arrive within a day, while container-based cargo from East Asia can take weeks and face volatile freight costs. Second, the rising risks and expenses tied to producing in China made alternatives more attractive, especially after tariff regimes and political uncertainty eroded confidence. And third, the USMCA trade agreement guarantees duty-free access and provides regulatory certainty that few other countries can match. Together, these three pillars, proximity, shifting calculus on China, and trade policy assurances, sealed Mexico's role as a viable and appealing base for production tied to U.S. demand. Geopolitical tensions added further momentum. As Washington and Beijing entered a prolonged cycle of tariffs, restrictions, and countermeasures, multinational firms hedged by moving capacity to safer and cheaper alternatives. Some reshored back into the U.S., but far more of that investment landed across the Mexican border. The cost advantage was obvious. Wages in Mexico remain far below those in the U.S., while productivity levels have narrowed. Mexican plants are also known for flexibility, capable of retooling quickly to shift between different product categories. Add in competitive shipping and energy costs, and the country managed to meet cost, skill, and logistical needs in a way that other emerging economies struggled to match. This realignment also reshaped the perception of economic dependency. For decades, economists warned Mexico was too reliant on exports to the United States, with more than 80% of shipments heading north. In 2025, that dependency has only deepened. Yet paradoxically, instead of weakening Mexico, it solidified its indispensability. The U.S. now depends on Mexican goods, especially in critical sectors like vehicles, electronics, and medical devices, as much as Mexico relies on U.S. demand. Washington's reliance on steady flows of these imports parallels its reliance on Canadian energy or European capital, altering the balance of interdependence across North America. The regional distribution of benefits, however, is uneven. Northern states such as Nuevo León, Baja California, and Tamaulipas remain the main export engines. Their ports, highways, and long-standing industrial ecosystems make them natural entry points for foreign companies. Daily movements of trucks across the border maintain a pipeline of goods that American plants, retailers, and consumers expect with little interruption. Yet in 2025, investment is beginning to spread more cautiously beyond the traditional border hubs. Firms are experimenting with production sites deeper in the interior and in southern states where operating costs are even lower and labor pools wider. The scale is still smaller than in the north, but patterns of diversification are emerging. The nature of Mexico's exports reinforces why this trade shift is politically resilient. Automakers cannot rapidly replace Mexican-sourced components without disrupting U.S. production lines. Electronics assembled in Mexico are embedded into products integral to American households and industries. The healthcare sector now depends on diagnostic equipment and surgical instruments supplied from Mexican factories. This reliance gives policymakers in Washington a strong incentive to sustain stable trade conditions with Mexico, ensuring that production lines remain uninterrupted. That leverage, subtle but powerful, represents a form of soft security that economic interdependence provides. Despite these gains, risks remain present. The U.S. economy still dictates Mexican fortunes, and any downturn north of the border would instantly cut into export volumes. Domestic risks in Mexico, including energy constraints or flare-ups in violence, could also undercut competitiveness. Yet for now, indicators point to resilience. Mexico's GDP expanded 0.7% quarter-on-quarter in Q2 2025, showing that growth at home aligned with heightened trade performance abroad. That combination of export strength and domestic expansion underscores why many observers see this as more than a temporary surge. Mexico's integration into U.S. supply chains has reached a depth that makes reversal unlikely in the short term. The key challenge ahead is whether this growth path can extend its benefits beyond the familiar northern states. For decades, development clustered tightly along the U.S. border, leaving central and southern regions behind. Now, early signs suggest that new industrial projects are gradually spreading southward. The crucial question is whether these gains can reach areas historically excluded from global supply chains, or whether the country will again rely on a narrow band of export hubs. The answer will determine if this historic trade position translates into broader, more inclusive development across Mexico. The new geography of growth inside Mexico. Growth is no longer confined to Mexico's northern border states. It is spreading into the south, though unevenly, and the early signs point to a shift in the country's long-standing economic geography. For decades, prosperity clustered in Monterrey, Ciudad Juárez, or Tijuana, creating the impression of two Mexicos, an industrialized north and a marginalized south. Now in 2025, new manufacturing and infrastructure projects are beginning to challenge that divide. The clearest evidence comes from states like Oaxaca, Chiapas, and Tabasco, long considered too poor or isolated to play much of a role in global supply chains. Today, investors are taking notice. Industrial parks are being developed in Oaxaca. Logistics zones in Tabasco are attracting companies tied to energy and advanced manufacturing. These projects are smaller than those along the border, but their presence signals that growth is widening beyond its traditional footprint. Two infrastructure initiatives frame this transition. The Maya train, running across the Yucatan Peninsula, reduces transport time by connecting towns directly to ports and urban centers, creating new industrial corridors where none existed before. The interoceanic corridor in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec is even more significant, linking Pacific and Atlantic coasts with modern rail and highways and offering an alternative route for moving goods between oceans. Both projects aim to make southern Mexico logistically viable for global firms, easing one of the biggest barriers that had kept investment away. Companies are responding. Electronics manufacturers are setting up in Tabasco's newly organized industrial parks, while in Chiapas, labor-intensive industries such as textiles are forming production clusters. Domestic players are joining too. Medium-sized Mexican firms see opportunities to build supply chains closer to home markets while still tied into international trade routes. Whether foreign or domestic, the message is similar. New infrastructure is allowing them to consider the South as part of their long-term plans. This economic shift is affecting migration patterns inside Mexico. For decades, young workers left southern states for jobs in Monterrey, Baja California, or the United States. Now, factory openings closer to home are beginning to reduce the need for such moves. It is still early, but in some communities, local employment is providing alternatives that keep families together and generate income that stays in the region rather than flowing north. On the ground, physical changes are visible. Southern highways once plagued by bottlenecks are being widened to handle export traffic more efficiently, while airports in cities like Villahermosa and Mérida are refurbishing cargo facilities. Rail lines built for the interoceanic corridor are designed for both freight and passengers, giving producers more consistent connections to national and global networks. These upgrades remain incomplete, but they collectively mark the first serious attempt in decades to integrate the South into the country's industrial system. Policy is reinforcing these developments. Incentive packages, tax breaks, and training programs are being targeted towards southern states, reflecting federal efforts to level the playing field. Expanded electricity grids and broadband infrastructure ensure plants and industrial parks can keep pace with global standards. Challenges remain, particularly in workforce readiness for advanced sectors, but the policy environment is clearly more supportive than in the past. The North, however, is not losing ground. Monterrey continues to dominate advanced automotive and electronics manufacturing, while Baja California's medical device exports remain robust. These hubs are still the backbone of Mexico's export economy. The difference in 2025 is that activity is being added elsewhere, with southern projects complementing, not replacing, the established clusters. Over time, this new geography of growth could cushion the economy by reducing reliance on any single set of states. Not all southern regions are attracting the same attention. Oaxaca and Tabasco, positioned along major corridors, are emerging as clear winners, while other states still lag due to weak governance or insufficient basic infrastructure. Even so, the existence of multiple growing points in the South marks a departure from the inertia that defined much of Mexico's recent economic history. Driving much of this shift is global nearshoring. With northern states reaching capacity, investors are looking for lower costs and available land further south. Southern wages remain competitive and land is cheaper, making states along new infrastructure routes appealing. The federal government has amplified the effect with targeted incentives, helping a region long overlooked. The durability of this shift will depend on whether these infrastructure projects deliver as promised. If they do, foreign and domestic firms are likely to stay and expand, embedding the South into supply chains that once bypassed it entirely. By mid-2025, it is evident that Mexico's economic map is being redrawn. Growth remains concentrated in the north but is no longer limited to it. Industrial corridors in the south, while uneven and still developing, give the clearest signal yet that Mexico is entering a new stage of regional integration. That raises another question. Why are companies, many of them headquartered thousands of miles away in Europe or Asia, willing to place such bets on Mexico at this moment? The answer is tied not only to geography but to a surge of foreign capital reshaping the country's prospects. Foreign investment flows reach record heights. Foreign investment flows into Mexico have reached levels that are reshaping the country's economic profile. In the first half of 2025 alone, official reporting shows roughly $34.3 billion in total FDI, with $3.1 billion in new projects during the second quarter. These figures place Mexico among the world's leading emerging markets for capital inflows and mark one of the strongest half-year performance totals on record. The data confirms that what is unfolding is more than a short-term reaction to trade disputes or tariffs. It signals a structural shift in how global capital views Mexico's role in supply chains. The drivers behind these inflows are consistent but increasingly diversified. Manufacturing continues to dominate, capturing around 36% of total FDI according to government figures. Within the share, three industries stand out: automotive, electronics, and medical devices. Automakers are extending production lines into electric vehicles and investing heavily in battery assembly plants. Electronics companies, especially from South Korea and Taiwan, are opening facilities capable of advanced production and testing, not just final assembly. Meanwhile, medical devices have expanded into a reliable pillar of investment, supplying both consumer and industrial demand throughout North America. Together, these industries explain much of the surge, reflecting Mexico's combination of cost competitiveness, trade certainty under USMCA, and a skilled workforce. This sectoral focus is complemented by geographic concentration. Despite headlines about projects in the South, most foreign capital still lands in Mexico's economic heartlands. Mexico City, Nuevo León, and the state of Mexico accounted for a major share of inflows in 2025, reflecting their established infrastructure, supply chains, and connectivity. These hubs remain the default destinations for higher-value projects, even as new investment corridors open further afield. The imbalance underscores a familiar pattern. Mexico's integration into global supply chains is deep, but uneven, concentrating the greatest benefits where industrial ecosystems are already dense. A key feature of the current wave is the balance between foreign and domestic capital. For much of the past 2 decades, Mexican firms hesitated to make long-term commitments, wary of risk tied to insecurity or political shifts. In 2025, that hesitation has shifted. Local companies are reinvesting, expanding existing facilities, retrofitting production lines, and forming joint ventures with global partners. This change matters. It means the new phase of foreign engagement is not being delivered in isolation, but in parallel with domestic capital, reinforcing the perception that this is a sustainable cycle of industrial upgrading rather than a one-off inflow. Why choose Mexico over Eastern Europe, Central America, or further reshoring to the United States? 3 reasons stand out. First is cost balance. Mexican manufacturing wages are rising but remain far below US levels, while still offering better productivity than cheaper Asian alternatives. Second is trade structure. USMCA guarantees tariff-free access that Asian competitors cannot match. Third is workforce depth. For decades, Mexican industry has trained engineers and technicians in autos, electronics, and precision equipment, creating a skills base that is ready to scale into new global sectors like semiconductors and electromobility. These are not temporary advantages, but structural ones that continue to attract new and reinvested capital. The source countries highlight diversification. While the United States remains the largest contributor, Europe and Asia are playing more prominent roles. German automakers with long histories in Mexico are scaling into battery production. South Korean electronics giants have shifted significant export assembly operations to Mexican plants. Even Japanese firms in robotics and heavy equipment are placing large-scale bets. These projects signal that global producers are repositioning their supply chains into regional blocks, and that Mexico now functions as the anchor for the Americas, a role parallel to Eastern Europe for the European Union. Examples illustrate this shift clearly. In Querétaro, advanced aerospace component production has attracted both European and American investors, transforming a once mid-sized cluster into a hub of technical expertise. In Nuevo León, billion-dollar battery projects linked to Germany's automakers are laying the groundwork for North America's electric vehicle supply chain. Tabasco, historically dependent on energy extraction, is seeing smaller but notable electronics assembly projects tied to Asian investors. Each case demonstrates how new investment aligns with both Mexico's traditional strengths and its emerging opportunities. At the same time, investors are extending beyond manufacturing. Renewable energy projects, particularly wind installations in Oaxaca and solar fields in northern states, are drawing attention. Digital infrastructure is growing as well, with new data centers rising around Guadalajara and Mexico City to support cloud computing and AI services. Logistics receives steady investment, with ports and airports undergoing major upgrades to handle expanded trade flows. Though these sectors attract smaller volumes compared with autos or electronics, they represent diversification that could help stabilize growth against sector-specific downturns. The government's ambitious infrastructure undertakings also benefit directly from these inflows. The Maya Train and the Interoceanic Corridor gain credibility not only from federal budgets, but from private firms willing to build around them. Industrial parks linked to these projects are already filling with tenants tied to foreign supply chains, translating large-scale public spending into productive capacity. Without FDI, these projects risked underutilization. With it, they begin to function as catalysts for regional development. Still, risks surround this optimism. Sharp global downturns or sudden shifts in demand could reverse flows quickly. Overconcentration in vehicle electrification poses particular risk if consumer demand underperforms. Likewise, political choices that trigger uncertainty in energy access or trade enforcement could make companies pause. Short-term volatility aside, the breadth of investment sources offers some resilience. Because capital now comes from multiple continents, not just the US, the foundations are more diversified than in past cycles. Yet beneath the record-breaking totals, one nuance stands out. Roughly 84% of inflows in the first half of 2025 came in the form of reinvested profits, not wholly new projects. On the one hand, this indicates confidence. Companies are comfortable taking profits earned in Mexico and doubling down locally rather than repatriating them. On the other hand, it underscores that fresh greenfield investment remains more limited. Whether Mexico can convert reinvested profits into a steady pipeline of genuinely new projects will be crucial for sustaining long-term momentum. Foreign investment, then, is redefining Mexico's global position. Companies see the country not only as a low-cost workshop, but as a central node in reorganized supply chains spanning the Americas. Yet the sustainability of these gains depends on whether firms can rely on the basic systems that underpin growth. Among those, none is more critical or more uncertain than energy. The energy transformation question. Can Mexico's power system keep factories running 24/7? The question matters because the country's economic momentum in 2025 depends on whether energy supply can match the speed of manufacturing and trade growth. At present, Mexico still relies heavily on hydrocarbons for electricity generation, with thermal plants supplying the bulk of the grid. This dependence exposes the industrial base to rising demand pressures, making reforms in the energy sector and upgrades to the transmission network urgent priorities. Much of the strain centers on PEMEX, the state-owned behemoth that for decades symbolized national pride in oil self-sufficiency. PEMEX continues to dominate exploration and refining, but years of declining production fields, mounting debt, and limited innovation have left it ill-equipped to lead a modern energy transition. Economists note that revenues from oil historically provided around 20% of government income, but the company's fiscal burden today poses risks to public finances as well as energy security. By diverting resources to prop up PEMEX, government spending on renewables and grid modernization has been constrained. Mexico is industrializing quickly, yet its largest energy player struggles to evolve at the pace demanded by investment inflows. The country's reliance on fossil fuels also creates a structural vulnerability. More than 70% of its electricity is generated from hydrocarbons, primarily imported natural gas supplemented by oil derivatives. Coal plays only a minor role, but the bigger challenge lies in dependence on U.S. gas pipelines. Mexico imports significant volumes of natural gas from its northern neighbor, an arrangement that provides a short-term price advantage, but also creates exposure to external shocks. Any disruption in U.S. supply or volatility in regional gas markets could undermine competitiveness for Mexico's new wave of industrial parks. For now, pipeline expansions and LNG facilities are being rolled out to secure flows into both northern and southern states, underscoring natural gas's dual role as both a transitional advantage and a strategic risk. Signs of change are beginning to take shape. Large renewable projects are finally moving forward after years of uncertainty. In Sonora, Mexico's desert sunlight supports vast solar parks that are expanding capacity. Oaxaca and Tamaulipas continue to attract world-scale wind projects, while investors are exploring opportunities in other southern regions newly connected to industrial corridors. Supported by policy incentives linked to nearshoring priorities, private capital is pouring into renewable generation, raising the share of clean energy even if it remains below global peers. These projects are not hypothetical. New panels and turbines are being installed at record pace, and they promise to diversify supply while creating local jobs. Yet renewable expansion alone will not solve the bottlenecks. The grid itself remains fragile. Transmission lines and substations designed decades ago now carry loads far beyond their original capacity. Industrial centers in the north and emerging hubs in the south both report occasional blackouts or frequency drops that compromise high-precision manufacturing. Advanced industries such as electric vehicle production, medical equipment assembly, and data centers cannot tolerate interruption. Without parallel investment in transmission infrastructure, new renewable plants risk generating electricity that the system cannot efficiently deliver to where it is most needed. For this reason, firms are watching not just generation numbers, but also the reliability of national grid upgrades. Trade agreements further shape the trajectory. Under the USMCA, commitments to reduce emissions and ensure regulatory fairness in energy markets create push factors for diversification. The agreement makes energy transformation a compliance issue, not just a matter of environmental aspiration. U.S. and Canadian partners expect Mexico to align with North American climate standards, while arbitration mechanisms back enforcement. This creates a framework that encourages private firms to place capital in renewables, confident that policy direction will remain anchored to regional trade obligations. Balancing politics and investment remains a sticking point. Mexico's government continues to treat PEMEX as a national champion, even while acknowledging its inefficiencies. Public subsidies keep the company afloat but limit fiscal space for alternatives. In contrast, the bulk of renewable progress comes from private firms requiring regulatory clarity before committing billions to 20-year energy projects. The tension between preserving state control and unlocking private capital is slowing momentum in areas where time is critical. Global manufacturers deciding to relocate capacity to Mexico need certainty not in 5 or 10 years, but right now. Community reactions also influence outcomes. Wind developments in Oaxaca, for example, generate local debates over land rights and the fair distribution of profits. While most projects are moving ahead, these disputes highlight the need for inclusive planning and shared benefits to secure long-term acceptance. Without addressing local concerns, projects risk delays that could cascade into supply pressures for industries relying on new capacity. Successful deals where communities share in revenue or job creation show that social inclusion is not optional but integral to maintaining steady rollout of renewable infrastructure. One positive aspect is the pace of private capital alignment with nearshoring opportunities. Energy-hungry manufacturing clusters, whether in automotive batteries, electronics, or medical devices, are being matched by privately financed green capacity nearby. In some regions, industrial contracts already secure renewable supply directly through power purchase agreements. This model ties foreign manufacturing investment to renewable demand, creating incentives for both infrastructure upgrades and long-term stability.